Thank you and good morning, everybody. Yes, my name is Nandaraja, and it literally means King of all joys. That's the meaning behind my name. And yes, I'd like to speak about the final step of the Eightfold Path, which is not really the final step. Yes, if you think of the Noble Eightfold Path as eight limbs, so you're sort of traversing each of the limbs at the same time. So we're going to be kind of using different metaphors, and those metaphors will kind of contradict themselves, and that's the kind of nature of the metaphors, that they're useful up to a point, but in order to really understand things, we have to be holding several metaphors at the same time. So one metaphor is to think of the Eightfold Path as steps, as rungs that you kind of traverse. And that's so kind of useful in the sense that if you're trying to make progress, you need certain sort of basic things in which you need to build upon. So you're building upon the previous steps. So the first step, is a right view. And in a sense, that's where it starts, the perfect vision. So starting with perfect vision, and then the remaining eight are the transformation, in light of those perfect vision. But the vision experience is not just one experience, it's more like an unfolding, and each of the other steps sort of allows it to go deeper, and it sort of infuses whichever step you're using. So if we use the metaphor of the steps of the path, then in a sense, you have to start somewhere, and the perfect vision is where you start. And then there has to be a perfect emotion. There has to be, we're driven by emotions most of the time. Well, I think most of the time, yeah. And we like to think it's our logic or our thoughts or our reason that guides us. But if we really want to make progress, there has to be an emotional drive to that. And so refining our emotion is the kind of the next step. Otherwise, the vision just drops away, and it just becomes another idea, or it becomes a dream, something we remember we had, and it just stays at that level. And then the third limb is perfect speech. So again, our mental state is sort of dictated but yeah, what we say and do, or what other people say and do, does affect and influence us. And so in the light of the vision and the emotion, we have to sort of transform our speech. And that's where the ethical sort of practices come in. So being mindful of our speech. Our speech not just has to be truthful, it has to be kind. It also has to have a sensitivity about it. And it has to be in harmony, and it has to be appropriate to the psychological state of the person receiving our speech. So how we communicate with one another, and even more importantly, how we communicate with ourselves is just that part. So for me, sort of perfect speech is more like externally, is how we talk to others. But how we talk to others is actually how we talk to ourselves. So when I used to work at IT, at Queen Mary University, I used to get lots of PhD students and even professors calling themselves stupid because they sort of they forgot to switch on, or they had a problem with the computer, and then they panic, they call me, and in my calm state of mind, I would just run through some of a checklist of what they needed to do. And then it becomes totally obvious what they needed to do. But it wasn't obvious because they were panicking, and then they would sort of respond with how stupid I am. And I sort of realized that, you know, even clever people think they're stupid. And that sort of internal self-talk then sort of translate into other people. So you see somebody else doing something naive and you kind of call them stupid because that's what you call yourself when you sort of make those mistakes. And for me, part of my communication was sort of trying to remind people that actually it is okay to make mistakes. Making a mistake doesn't make you stupid or dumb or whatever. And so not to give yourself a hard time for making mistakes, because it's from those mistakes that you learn. And even if you make the same mistake over and over again, that doesn't make you stupid. It just means you're not mindful. You're not sort of learning about your state of mind and what arises from that. So that's where the sort of meta-bhavana meditation practice comes in. You know, just being kind to yourself, sort of noticing what's happening, and not and just sort of negotiating with the inner critic so that you can actually be more skillful in your internal communication. And then that leads on to right action, you know, how you act towards other people. And then that sort of widens into right livelihood, you know, how you make your living, the manner in which you do what you need to do to survive in the physical environment. Yes, and that can be quite painful, especially in light of perfect vision, because sometimes, unfortunately, you may have to give up your job simply because it's unskillful. But it's not as simple as that. But being in an unskillful, making your livelihood in an unskillful way impacts on your mind and impacts on all the other aspects of your life. And so either having to change the mode of how you make your livelihood, or even having to give up your livelihood in order to find a more appropriate livelihood that will sort of sustain your practice or what you wish to be as a human being. Is just part of the sort of transformation. So transformation is not necessarily pleasurable, and there will be conflicts simply because the act of transformation would mean letting go of certain things in order to gain other things. And then the question is it worth it? So and then the sixth stage, sort of perfect effort, sort of noticing the arising of skillful and unskillful mental states and sort of managing those. And again, all that is supported by all the previous stages, if we talk about them as steps. In that it's much easier having right livelihood and all that's on the support of your speech precepts and all the other things to sort of maintain a skillful mental state on a much more not permanent, but it's easier to sustain them for longer times. So you're not sort of going from skillful to unskillful mental state. You can sort of prevent the arising of unskillful mental state. You can sort of maintain that and you can prevent unskillful mental states from arising simply because you sort of created an environment in which it's much easier to be aware of that, to notice that, and then to apply yourself to that. And then with perfect effort, you can then come to perfect awareness. And that's where you start to discover that you are not who you think you are. That you tend to think of yourself as this permanent, solid, fixed self, and then the mental states are kind of imposed on you. So you are sort of overcome by greed, or you're overcome by hatred, or you're overcome by delusion. But it's just basically you. And this various other sort of skillful and mental states, sort of they overcome you, and then you sort of come back to yourself. But what I would like to say is that it's more like you start to notice that you're not a single self, that you're a bundle of contradictory selves. And these selves have been sort of established throughout your history. So in the sort of first 7 years of your mental development as a child, you've sort of imprinted certain things from your environment, from your parents, from teachers, and from other people. And you've just sort of taken them in as part of who you are. You haven't questioned them. And these selves come in the sense of what I call voices in the head. What I refer, self-talk. But it's not just that there's one self talking to itself. It's like there's several selves arguing with themselves as to who is going to be in charge. Depending on your mental state, there's usually one or two selves that are usually in charge. Yeah. So if you're an angry person, the anger selves, is the one that's usually in charge. But sometimes when you're in the right condition, it sort of lets go of the reins, and a much more compassionate self sort of comes into being. But again, that's just a kind of a metaphor. So it's not that you are crazy. Those voices in the head are sort of there to kind of help you, but they're like unhelpful friends, backseat drivers. They sort of comment, punish, do whatever it is to make you into a good person. But actually what happens is that they end up sort of distorting the sense of reality. You're not sort of seeing things as they really are. So you're sort of fighting an internal battle. And because you are fighting an internal battle, a lot of your energy gets dissipated in that sort of internal mental conflict. So that's kind of where sort of perfect effort comes in that you become much more aware of what's going on. Yeah. So for me, I sort of kind of identified sort of 4 major sort of sub-selves that are sort of coming to engagement. So there is the sort of what we call the sort of toddler self, which is more about gaining domination over the environment. It's pleasure seeking. It's about right here, right now. What can I, it's basically asked, what's in it for me? It comes from that sense, that the world is a hostile place, and I have to get as much as I want in order to survive. And that's just a necessary aspect of the sort of human evolution, of the sort of mental evolution of the human being. Yeah. So that's, that doesn't really use language. It uses impulses, very strong tendencies, and in meditation, it's more like getting to know it, befriending it, noticing what kind of triggers bring it into being, and pacifying it. Yeah, so it needs to be soothed, and then there's a kind of 9 to 10-year-old kind of bargaining self. So it's more, it's a kind of Machiavellian thing. It's sort of, how can I manipulate and control other people to give me what I want? So some things I can get for myself, but for some other things, I need other people. So it sort of creates a network of negotiation. So it's like a sort of ruthless businessman, you know, and it's, again, that's just part of the sub-personality. It's just there. And again, what it needs is some form of control. In meditation practice, it's again sort of noticing the tricks. You know, how you deceive yourself is how you deceive other people. And the people you gather around yourselves tend to reflect that sort of kind of mental state. So in meditation, it's sort of getting to know that part, you know, that sort of pacifying it, is sort of knowing, taking back your power, sort of being aware that actually you are powerful. You're not powerless. You are powerful, and you can control. You can't control other people, but other people also control you. And having avoiding the urge to dominate, yeah, and so more like participating and being more responsive, being responsible, being able to respond rather than reacting. And then there's another part which is highly sexual. So that sort of comes in the teenage years, and that, you know, has a very strong driving force of wanting immortality or permanence, and that sort of fragment is a very, you know, the sexual urge is a very biological and necessary thing, but that also has to be tamed. And those sort of three forces so far tend to sort of dominate most of our personality. And then the fourth one is more, I would call it, say, the adult. So it's about taking care of the other three, managing them, making sure they're not fighting too much with each other, and also sort of noticing that that is what is also happening to other people. So sort of recognizing that self and other are not as distinct as we would like to think of them. And so, you know, being aware of the environment, being aware of our history and other people's history, and it's much more non-judgmental. So that awareness sort of recognizes the flaws in ourselves and in others, and it's not trying to fix it, but in that awareness, we can sort of embrace ourselves and everybody. So that sort of aspect is more in line with the meta-bhavana practice, in which we go to the fifth stage, in which we sort of tend to dissolve the self, the friend, the neutral person, and the difficult person. Yeah. And so, but there is another aspect of the self that even transcends that. And that is where we come to samadhi. So in that, there's a kind of continuity of awareness. So we're aware of all the other 7 stages. We're aware of all the factors of that. And the word concentration is helpful in a certain way, in that when you're concentrated, it's more like there's more of whatever it is there is there. What I can say is that most of the time, they're kind of diluted. We're all over the place. And in concentration, there's a bit more focus. But that focus does not exclude. So it's more like going from maybe a 12-inch black and white TV to a 100-inch widescreen, high definition TV, yeah, in which everything is clear. You haven't lost anything, but it's not focused. Yeah, it's a much more wider thing, and because it's much wider, it means there's no tendency to identify with any one aspect of the view of what you're observing. So so you've gone from sort of gathering yourself into sort of one being, and then sort of noticing that you are mirrored in all other beings. And so because you are mirrored in all other beings, you are part of this system of consciousness. It's not just your consciousness isolated within this bag of skin. It's like it's all consciousness have that sort of feel to it. And it's not even that, it has to be human consciousness. Also, there are other levels of consciousness. So what is disregarded or may not be even thought of as unethical becomes unethical just because you are in emotional sympathy with all living beings. So the sort of the eating of meat, the exploitation of other human beings becomes much more clear. So the ethical awareness becomes more refined. Your effort is much more balanced. You're aware of self and others, but you're also aware that there's that kind of, there's a slight delusion in separating self from others. So the mindfulness of breathing is part of the sort of samatha practice. It's sort of calming the mind enough to sort of notice what's going on. And then with samadhi, we come into sort of vipassana insight, in which we sort of notice that what we think of as ourselves is a slight delusion of the mind. It's a slight delusion, necessary up to a point, but nevertheless, it has its own limitations. And those limitations sort of get loosened. So the first, we have to become ourselves. We have to sort of unify the various parts of ourselves. And then having sort of unified ourselves, then we can expand ourselves to include more and more of reality. And then we sort of notice that the nature of language and the belief systems that we've grown up with are not sort of really necessary. And there's a sense of not having to prefer one thing over the other. So it's not that you don't care, it's just that it's whatever happens is okay because you're sufficiently sort of unified in that you can come into any situation and behave appropriately, say what is necessary. And there's not that kind of constant mental chatter that goes on normally. And so you're kind of responding from a different place. You're not responding from a fixed sense of self. You're not responding from what's in it for you or what will benefit your family. You kind of sort of see how we all create dukkha for ourselves. We all sort of create the situation in which craving arises, and we can end it. So we sort of see how insubstantial the self is, how unsatisfactory the situation we find ourselves in, and we stop looking for the answers in the wrong places. And we just see that impermanence is just a feature. And even if we sort of talk about perfect samadhi as a state of mind, that in itself is not necessarily permanent, but that is okay because it's more like a process and much like an unfolding. And then we come back right into full circle, back into right view. So another metaphor we can use is that it's a kind of radiating path, like the wheel, and that insofar as we go into each path, the deeper we go into each path, we see each of the path mirroring all the other 8. And it becomes a kind of holistic cyclic system, what in mathematics is called a fractal, in which the whole system is contained within even a part of it, or a hologram, in which a little bit, a fragment contains the whole image and is embodied in the whole image. So in a sense, perfect samadhi includes all the other states and infuses all the other states. And that sort of lack of limitation, that choiceless action, not having any preferences, and sort of seeing the delusion that sort of creates division and separateness is that. And it's not something that you achieve just in sitting. It also infuses your everyday life. So walking in nature or walking in the city, you see that expressed in itself. But ultimately, it goes beyond words. It goes beyond the 4 dhyanas. You're sort of approaching non-identification, non-form. And at that stage, language breaks down. So that's as far as I can go with it. But you do get glimpses, and those glimpses you can use to inform all the other 7 stages. Yeah, so the whole metaphor, I would say, is like a hologram. The Eightfold Path is like a hologram. Each path contains all the others, and is contained within them. Thank you.